forces maritime militia in the South China Sea. Okay, so we will let her have the floor for 15 minutes, and then I'll make some comments, and then we'll move on to the second presentation. Ms. Asma Rostam, please. Okay.
Nervous here, Professor. Okay, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Isma. I'm originally from Indonesia, but I'm staying in Taipei because I'm a doctoral student in National Chengchi University. And today I will presenting about one of my paper, but this is I'm not confident to presenting about this because this paper is not finished yet. But I will try my best. And the title is about the China's maritime strategy in Southeast Asia territorial dispute that we know South China Sea and or 9-days line dispute. And China have a maritime strategy to deploy not only People Liberation Army Navy, but also China Coast Guard and People's Armed Force Maritime Militia. And I will begin with elaborate the competition in the region. Okay, the competition in the region not only between China, Vietnam, and Philippines, but also Brunei and Taiwan. And Indonesia is not a party in the conflict, but we have several incidents in northern of Indonesian territory in the North Natuna Sea. And the competition here is have multiple and several solutions until today. The dispute between the China and Vietnam around the Paracel Island in the northern and the Spratly Island between China, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and in the Scarborough Shoal between China, Taiwan, and Philippines, and also I put near sea strategy of China that include the conflict in East China Sea between China and Japan. And about the South China Sea maritime dispute, this is based on the traditional fishing ground of China. China also put in their Zhenghu Ansha is have been taught in the China school, also become a primary reason that China want to claim the 9-days line. And because the Zhenghu Ansha, or the little island in the northern of in the southern of South China Sea, is perception gap between the China and its neighbor embassy. And in Xi Jinping era, we know about the China's rejuvenation or China's dream or many ambition of China based on the Xi Jinping promote because the weak maritime power leads to a declining nation, and he want China to be a strong maritime power because a strong maritime power leads to a strong nation. And in South China Sea also we can see that China never implements power maximizing. China never have open conflict between the neighbors, but nor engage the peaceful approach. So China implements both coercion and cooperation because this is related to the strategic interest in his strategic culture. And we can see here about the island feature in the South China Sea with the blue one. If you want to check the updated information about the occupation status in South China Sea, you can open it in the MT GSIS. And another resource of the conflict, because another reason of the conflict because of the natural resources, and also this choke point, this South China Sea is important shipping lanes, not only for China but also for United States. Because of that, until now, United States also promote about the freedom of the seas. And South China Sea, maybe all of you know about the large reserve of oil and natural gas in the South China Sea, and a lot of data you can find in the Google search. And this is the important aspects of geopolitics in international relation in the South China Sea is about the territory, natural resources, and also power distribution between the country and superpower country. Right now we know about the Indo-Pacific power distribution. And triangular relation among these factors about the territory, national resources, and power distribution tends to determine characteristics and conditions that include of escalating, de-escalating, and de-escalating force. And this is about the China's recognition in the island. This is Tian Kun Hao, China's dredger. The most powerful island maker in the world, not only in the China Sea. And so I'm trying and thinking how to improve my paper, not only as a descriptive paper, but how to make this more analyzed. So I usually call it as explanation research. So I will put idea about the constructivism theory, why China have policies and interests in the South China Sea. One of the strategy is spreading or deploying the maritime militia. Based on the constructivism theory, I find the strategic culture to explain about it. About the constructivism framework in international relation, we can make this as a solution to analyze about the China behavior, not only in the South China Sea but in East China Sea and another ocean in the world, and China China have a strategy, a near sea strategy. They spread three maritime power, PLAN, Coast Guard, and Maritime Militia in the three seas nearest, located nearest from the China. The first is Yellow Sea, East China Sea, and South China Sea. And for a constructivism approach, adopt non-material elements and the interest and action of China are determined largely by these non-material elements that I mentioned before about the strategic culture. Because I see on the Alastair Johnson published about the China's foreign policy during in the Mao era. He used the cultural realism, or strategic culture, to describe about the aggressive and militaristic China at the time. Cultures plays an important role in China approach in the South China Sea since the China's historical or imperial era, and have a great impact to the foreign policy until now. Because of that, maybe some of the presenters here will elaborate about the BRI and China Maritime mega project in BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And Xi Jinping remarked also several years ago in National University in Singapore about the South China Sea Island are China's territory since the ancient times. And when she meets the U.S. Defense Secretary, he also say we cannot lose even 1 inch of the territory left behind because by our ancestor. And the strategy employing maritime militia operation in the South China Sea is a pattern of non-coercive for dominating the seascape without risk and to open conflict, because of the China always use and deploy the maritime militia until now, and this is the most effective method of pursuing China's interest and ambition without confrontation. So China want to win without confrontation, and want to war without gun smoke. And based on the strategic culture, China foreign policy is strongly influenced by tradition that have been rooted for thousands of years. And ancient China's philosophy texts, we know Sun Tzu, the ideas of the strategy of near seas. It's rooted from Sun Tzu and also Alfred Mahan, philosopher for the ancient of China and United States philosopher. And the PLAN teach that its members are heirs to an ancient Chinese legacy and the Chinese Communist Party revolutionary struggles. This strategy is renewed every I forget how many years in the white papers of China military defense. And the concept of China's strategic culture described as balance between defense and offense. There is flexibility, active defense, and it influenced also to the ambition of China's dream under Xi Jinping today. And here is the picture of a maritime militia in the South China Sea. Yeah, I mentioned before about the strategic control near seas. China has a big project to strengthening its military power in the Yellow, East and South China Sea, and also influence in the Indo-Pacific two ocean, Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean, and also using the maritime militia. China leading the maritime militia unit are undergoing unprecedented professionalization and militarization. And another literature also using the gray zone strategy or gray zone operation that elaborate about the activity of Coast Guard China and also maritime militia China. And here is several example of maritime militia where they support activity in building artificial island in the South China Sea. The militia support China's Coast Guard, resupply China's artificial installation around the 3 seas. And for example, when artificial island built by China in South China Sea or in South China Sea, a number of China's maritime militia and fishing boat maneuver around it to support the activity. And since 1995 until 2012, for example, in Scarborough incident, the frontline action by the Coast Guard and maritime militia that resulted China's takeover of Ursuline from Philippines in 2014. It also see incidents in several oil rig incidents. Okay, because the time is up. Okay, I didn't have. Thank you, Shishi.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I call you Ismail? Okay, thank you very much, Ismail. I will make a few comments. I won't take up too much time. My comments are based on the paper that you have submitted and also your presentation. The first part of your presentation is about what's happening in the South China Sea. Now, for those of us who study China, Southeast Asia relations, the South China Sea is an area which we cannot escape discussing. All right. So all those materials that you have presented in your PPTs are very familiar to us. What is new in your presentation is your argument about the role of the maritime militia as China's strategy, right, to dominate this particular area. Okay? And I think you make the argument that, well, the strategic culture of China is such that they will occupy this particular area or exert influence in this particular area without people notifying, without people realizing that they are doing so. All right? There is this Tai Chi culture, this Tao culture, there's this hidden culture in the China's strategic thinking, that when they want to advance, they will give you the appearance of retreat, you see. So this strategic culture actually explains the employment of China's maritime militia in this particular strategic area. Now the militia, of course, the identity is unknown, right? Whether it is government-sponsored or whether it is a professional army, right? Although I think you make the argument that they are part of the paramilitary, right, of the People's Liberation Navy, right? But certainly China has been very effective in employing the militia in advancing their strategic interests. As you said, the operation has expanded, and I think it's your argument that they have been quite effective. The question that I have actually is this, that how much of this incremental approach by China, or the hidden approach, or the not so obvious approach of dominating the South China Sea strategy are acceptable to the claimant countries like Indonesia? I think towards the end of your paper you mentioned something about the Indonesian position in this regard. When you measure effectiveness, I'm not sure how you do that, but one way to do that would be to see the responses of the claimant countries, right? Including Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, of course, right, which is a very big claimant in the South China Sea. So that's one question for you, right? What have been the responses from these claimant countries when you measure the effectiveness of China's maritime militia? Okay. So the second question that I have for you is, what is the identity of this militia? What is the identity of this China maritime militia? Are they government sponsored? Are they sanctioned by the state? Or how much control does the Chinese PLA and the PL Navy, right, have over this militia? And I think even the materials that I come across, right, from the CIA and the intelligence sources, actually I'm not quite sure of how this maritime militia being organized or financed, right, by the government of China. So unless you draw a link, a strong link, right, between this militia with the Chinese government, I'm not very sure if you indeed can come to a conclusion that this is really part of the strategy of China trying to dominate this particular area of strategic importance. Okay, so these are just two questions that I have for you. Maybe later on we can open up for discussion. Okay, now let me turn to the second presentation. The second presentation will be on uneasy alliance, ASEAN multilateralism amidst a creeping China. Now that seems to be a follow-up of the first presentation, right? Is an incremental strategy of China, a creeping China. That is very interesting. Let's give the floor to Mr. Aloko Panio.
Good morning, everyone. Let me start with saying that multilateralism has been an important component of international relations. We know this for many years, and it has become even more relevant with the rise of China as a global power. So as countries in the ASEAN seek to balance their economic and strategic interests, they are also increasingly likely to look to multilateral cooperations and organizations as a way to manage their relationship with China, as we know. Now, this paper seeks to explore that link between multilateralism and sentiment towards China. Basically, I argue that weak identification with ASEAN as a community makes countries less likely to consider China as beneficial and therefore less likely to be supportive of multilateral initiatives aimed at addressing China's threats. Specifically, this paper will examine the extent to which countries are willing to cooperate with one another to achieve shared goals and the determinant factors that may influence their decision to do so. Now, ASEAN and China have significant economic, political, and security ties. We know this. Understanding the sentiment of ASEAN countries towards China, therefore, can help gauge the overall state of their bilateral relationships. Positive sentiment can foster closer cooperation, while negative sentiment can strain relations and hinder regional integration efforts. China is a major trading partner for ASEAN. And of course, how we react, our sentiment, can influence economic interactions. So, positive outlook, like positive sentiment, may encourage increased trade, investment, and collaboration, while being critical, negative sentiment in this case, can impact consumer behavior, investment decisions, and the overall business environment. So, analysis of sentiment is very important. Now, as you can see, China's activities, as mentioned a while ago, in the West Philippine Sea in particular, have become a matter of concern for many ASEAN countries. So, while ASEAN member states have varying degrees of territorial claims and maritime disputes in the South China Sea, China's rather assertive actions, including the construction of artificial islands, the militarization of beaches, and interference overall with fishing and resource exploration activities in the area, have raised alarm within the region. Public sentiment within ASEAN towards China can shape people-to-people interaction, as you know. For example, cultural exchanges and perceptions of each other's societies can have an impact on how we deal with each other. So, understanding the sentiment allows governments, think tanks, and civil society organizations to design effective communication strategies, public diplomacy initiatives, and cultural exchanges that foster mutual understanding and cooperation. So overall, analyzing the sentiment of ASEAN countries towards China is essential for comprehending regional dynamics and informing policy making. Now, interestingly, the Pew Research Center has conducted surveys and studies to analyze public opinion and attitudes towards China in various countries around the world. The findings are actually interesting because it indicates there's a growing negative sentiment towards China in recent years. There are several reasons behind this trend, including China's growing assertiveness in foreign policy, among others, its record in human rights violations, particularly in relation to issues such as freedom of speech, as well as its initial handling of the COVID outbreak. Now, in the literature, there are several theories and frameworks that can help understand sentiments towards China. Take note that we are interested in sentiment towards China. This is our operationalization of the research problem. For instance, realism and power politics can influence views about China, such that countries located in China's immediate neighborhood, particularly those with territorial disputes or security concerns related to China's assertiveness, will be expected to have more negative views. Economic interdependence is also a determinant. Thus, a positive economic interaction would likely be explained by positive sentiment. On the other hand, economic competition, job losses, or perceived unfair trade practices can lead to negative sentiment. Another school of thought, soft power, we know this, but it is very familiar to us, developed by Joseph Nye, suggests that a country's attractiveness and ability to shape preferences through cultural, ideological, and diplomatic means can enhance and influence sentiment. Now, China's cultural exports, such as music, movies, and Confucian institutes, can shape perceptions and sentiments towards the country. There are also theories related to public opinion and media framing. They explore how media portrayals and media discourse shape sentiments. Media coverage in particular, including news reporting, political narratives, and social media discussions, can influence public perception of China and shape sentiments through selective framing, agenda setting, and priming effects. There are also theories related to nationalism and identity, which highlight how sentiments toward China can be shaped by national identity, historical narratives, and perceived threats to cultural or national values. Nationalistic sentiments following this argument can influence attitudes towards China particularly during periods of heightened nationalism or identity politics. Here's another view leaning towards individual psychological factors, such as cognitive biases, stereotypes, and attitudes, which are argued to be influential in shaping sentiments towards China. Cognitive processes, in this case, like confirmation bias or attribution bias, can shape how individuals interpret information about China and develop sentiments based on pre-existing beliefs or stereotypes. However, we notice the link between cognitive citizen behavior and sentiment toward China is not extensively explored in the literature. And that is where this study comes in. This study's theoretical conjecture builds on this gap and construes domestic perception of multilateralism as correlated with perceptions toward a particular state. So multilateralism in this case is tied to the identification and attachment individuals or groups have towards a specific region or individual or group, and often based on shared cultural, economic, or political factors. This sense of regional identity, this argument, can influence how people perceive and interact with other regions or states, including neighboring countries. Specifically, I argue that countries in the ASEAN who weakly identify as belonging to the community are also less likely to consider China as beneficial, hence tend to have a more critical sentiment towards China. According to social identity theory, individuals derive part of their self-concept and sense of belonging from membership in social groups. These social identities can shape attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, including sentiments toward outgroups like China. Here, individuals who feel less strongly about ASEAN may prioritize their own country's interests over regional cooperation or unity. They may view China through the lens of bilateral relationships, focusing on the potential harm China can bring to smaller states that lack the support of a regional organization. Of course, this narrower focus on individual country interests may lead to more negative perception of China, especially if they perceive China as a significant security threat. We have to test this formally though. So to test this, I analyzed 2 waves of the Asia Barometer survey data, waves 4 and 5. The Asian Barometer survey is a comparative survey of 18 Asian states and territories. However, the study is limited to 7 ASEAN countries because Asia Barometer includes non-ASEAN countries. So these countries are Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Myanmar. Not all ASEAN states have been respondents to the survey. And then I utilize logistic regression analysis. And then I look into the odds of citizens from these countries to perceive China as doing more good or harm in Asia. This is the operational measure for sentiment towards China. At this point, let me discuss briefly about the methodology. Multilateralism is the main independent variable, operationalized in the survey as citizens' feeling of closeness with ASEAN as a region. Since this is modeled as a correlational study, I also, of course, controlled for other cognitive factors which in the literature might explain citizen attitude towards China. For instance, I also controlled for global branding, or the favorable regard they have about China, as well as their regard about the United States. I also controlled for how citizens' overall perception about their economy may influence their perception about China. I also included 2 trust variables. These are domestic-related variables, trust in people in general, and trust the government and how they might influence perception about China. The main exploratory variable is citizens' feeling of closeness with ASEAN. This question was specific to citizens of ASEAN in the Asia Barometer. And they were not asked to other Asia Barometer participants. And we can see here in the table that countries such as Vietnam, Malaysia, and Singapore feel close to ASEAN in both survey waves 4 and 5. If you are curious of where the Philippines sits, Filipino citizens' sense of affinity with ASEAN is generally mixed, actually, as you can see in the figure. So we're like in the middle, right? Of course, we are interested in this study to establish how a sense of affinity with ASEAN can determine attitude towards China. So the study utilized a simple measure of attitude based on whether citizens perceive China's influence in Asia as doing more harm or good. So in the figures you can see here, you see that Vietnam and Indonesia, again surprisingly, generally see more harm than good in China. So countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Cambodia, on the other hand, seem to view China more positively. Again, where does the Philippines sit in the equation? Philippines' reception of China is generally mixed. Surprise, surprise. So that is, there seems to be a balance between those who view China positively and those who view China negatively. As I said, we need a more formal investigation. So our inferential tests involve several logistic regression models. So in the table you can see here, the first column corresponds to the fourth wave of the Asian barometer survey. And the next is the result of the fifth wave. So what we see here is that there is evidence for our social identity hypothesis, in which citizens who feel distant with ASEAN also tend to have more positive attitude, or rather, more negative attitude towards China. And you can see here, this seems to be true, and this is rather surprising. The small cross at the wave 4 indicates weak significance. That indicates that this relationship seems to be true only for wave 5. What this means is that you can infer several things. One, it could be that China was perceived more positively in the past and was perceived more negatively only more recently. That's one. It also, well, it's possible that ASEAN multilateralism is a weak predictor of attitude towards China. That's also a possibility. But what seems to be consistent is that positive reception of China's influence in Asia also motivates positive attitudes towards China. There are some interesting revelations involved in cross-variables as well, as you can see. For example, confidence in government creates confidence in foreign policy towards China. That implies that how states deal with foreign entities is much more, in a significant way, a function of domestic policies. Now, let me just make a brief conclusion. The salience of social identities can influence attitudes and sentiments. And when individuals' national or cultural, yes, I'm almost there, cultural identities made salient, it can heighten a move out of distinctions and potentially lead to more polarized sentiment towards China. There are several implications here. This is going to be my last slide, by the way. First, at the domestic level, citizens who are ill-informed about geopolitical developments can be susceptible to political manipulation, of course, driving down confidence in regional organizations and consequently affecting attitudes towards China. Additionally, in light of efforts towards an expansive ASEAN community, given that individual level distrust informs state-level cynicism of multilateral organizations, regional alliances must therefore transcend their roles beyond simply articulating to actively committing to achieve developmental cooperation and regional security across member states. Thank you everyone for listening.
I will call upon Professor Lee to make comments about the paper. Professor Lee.
I'm extremely honored being invited to attend a Wenzao ICSEAS conference again. And it's very nice to see Professor Ho and to meet some more colleagues from abroad and both in Taiwan and also in Taiwan. Two papers. I'm from Jiayi, National Zhongzheng University. I do some research on China-ASEAN relations, so this is kind of my core interest, you know, of my enterprise. Two papers I serve to discuss with our highly timely investigation because it is now a more fragmenting and regionalizing world in which Southeast Asia is already on top of successful cases in terms of regional integration. The first paper is on a citizen level perception on ASEAN multilateralism and citizens' perception and towards a role and external political actor, and how the identity and the perception affects citizens' perception towards regional multilateralism and ASEAN +1 feel negatively or positively towards China. So it is a very creative enterprise, and the findings are kind of counterintuitive in some sense. By using the Asia Barometer Survey's data, I think this paper seeks empirical foundation to explore how ASEAN citizens' attitude towards the regional organization and China. So the correlation is very interesting, and because people used to think more on this issue in terms of country specific, like Philippines or Singapore or Indonesia, but very few research on citizen level. And it is always intriguing that how people in ASEAN countries perceive ASEAN as really a significant identity. That's the first thing that we are so curious. And it seems that in some countries they feel more closely to this organization, particularly Indonesia, Singapore, but less that overwhelming, like from Philippines and Thailand. Because I sometimes met friends from Thailand. They usually say, no, don't place too much significance on ASEAN as a community. So it seems that now we directly have data from citizen level. So this is a worth pursuing direction about regional identity and how power politics get involved in the development of regional identity. But I would like to know more about two ways of Asia Barometer Survey. One is conducted when, exact date, because I think that would matter. Because if there's some significant international event occur at that time, that would significantly, shape.
COVID, for example.
Yeah, and that will help you to discern, how a big international event as an intervening variable, like a COVID, or like a war, or like Philippines' recent tension with China. Yeah, that will help us to see, how it fluctuates and why it appears mixed. Yeah, but overall, this is a very good direction because we have solid data. I'm not sure if the Asia Barometer Survey will conduct periodically.
It is actually, but the question about China and multilateralism came only in the two waves. So these are the most recent waves. Waves 1, 2, and 3, they don't have that question.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So we cannot plot time. I think it's interesting, we can make a time series, right?
Yeah.
We cannot.
Yes. And another tiny question for you is that the title, An Easy Alliance. But I'm not sure if you mean the alliance is between ASEAN plus China. Then it's kind of different from the conventional IR theory that alliance means those people have the same, share some kind of strategic vision. It looks like China is not alliance with ASEAN. It's kind of ASEAN as a central organization, and China is a plus. It's a plus, and not enter into alliance structure. That's a little bit I'm confused. Yeah, by using the term alliance. And the second is about the South China Sea disputes. I think scholars of ASEAN has a mixed assessment of ASEAN by using the same case. You know, whether South China Sea dispute is a success or a value to prove ASEAN is working or not working. But I offer another perspective. I think because originally China wanted one bilateral negotiation between climate countries. Yeah, but now that they were willing to move the negotiation into the multilateral forum, then I think the climate countries could gain some kind of collective power, better than bilateral negotiation with strong power. So I would like to see it's the success of ASEAN, because if skillfully and effectively make a greater power to negotiate with them collectively within a multilateral setting. So that could be seen as the COC's the proceeding is it's better than bilateral negotiation. And you said something about soft power. Yeah, implication that I totally agree with. But I think in the end you made some conclusion that you said China need to rethink its current carrot and stick strategy to win hearts and minds, not just of those who identify themselves strongly as part of South Asia, but a whole of ASEAN. That intrigues me. What is the difference? As a part of Southeast Asia, but as ASEAN as a whole. So, I mean, it's a different identity. It's a national identity and a regional identity. I'm not sure how much significant that people in Southeast Asia thinks ASEAN as a whole is very powerful and significant identity besides national identity, and how they perceive China would like to form a relationship. They use community theory. Yeah, they don't use alliance theory. They use they want to conduct a community with ASEAN as a community. So it's interesting. It seems reasonable that if people they don't feel closely to the community concept, so they just kind of feel critical of all that kinds of community building. Perhaps they pretend national identity strongly. So that explains the finding. So, but I think on this topic there's no inclusive remarks can be made. We're really depending on what kind of data you use and which country are you from and what kind of international elements. But you mentioned a recent phenomenon, which I agree with. You mean they're more like some negative, sentiment. So that's very different from perhaps 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, which China usually being described as China charm, charm diplomacy. Then suddenly it kind of shift to another kind of whether it's a strategic shift or tactical leads to a creative direction. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for Professor Lee's very insightful comment. I'm quite sure there are a lot of things to take in. If we have time, we can continue to discuss these issues. But we need to end by 12:10 in the interest of lunch. So let me call upon the third presenter to do a presentation. The topic has to do with unveiling ASEAN diplomatic equivalent, assessing member nation states' responses to the Russia-Ukraine conflict amidst US-China rivalry. We have here 4 students from Wenzao ICSEAS-Panel University, and you have only 1 presenter. Am I correct? We have 15 minutes. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, and then we move on.
All right. Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jose Emilio Luis Combatir. Together with me are my fellow classmates, Michael John Subigca, Earl Santinuela, and Mr. John Patrick Pagiran. We are collaborating with our professor on this paper. Our professor is Sir Raymond Flores, and he has invited us to work with him on the paper unveiling ASEAN's diplomatic equilibrium, assessing member nation states' responses to the Russia-Ukraine conflict amidst US-China rivalry. So, for us to begin, we have to delve into what this research article is all about. It explores the responses, or essentially the immediate responses of the ASEAN member nation states, their ongoing and proactive measures on how to deal with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, at the same time balancing their relation with the United States and China as well, on whether they lean towards a specific global superpower or whether they would want to be independent and remain neutral in this issue. We would also want to look into the legal justifications employed by the member nation states of ASEAN to substantiate their actions and their public responses, including the varying interests of the government and their citizens of the ASEAN member nation states. And lastly, we have to make a link between their inclinations and responses towards either China, the US, or simply to their own nation's interests. Next slide, please. If we look at this graph, we are essentially focusing on the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how it is being supported by, influenced by the ASEAN member nation states, not the international organization itself, because we understand that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, they rely on the principle of non-interventionism, and they would not want to get themselves involved as an international organization on these conflicts, but rather focus on their individual member nation states. And outside of all of that, we have to understand that these member nation states are already vying to look for support to be whether they want to remain independent, but still they cannot escape their dependence on simply the global superpowers between the United States of America and China when it comes to military security, the global economy, and their international relations with other countries as well. So we begin, or we move on to the immediate responses for each of the ASEAN member nation states, and we have classified it into 4. First, we have the hardline response. Next, we have the measured diplomacy. Third, we have the neutral stance. And lastly, affirmation or endorsement. First, the hardline response. These are the countries that demonstrated explicit condemnation of Russia's actions, consistently aligned its official statements and participation in international responses such as the United Nations General Assembly resolutions and ASEAN official statements, and has also imposed sanctions on Russia. And Singapore is the only country that we have found to be under this category. Measured diplomacy, these are the countries that voted in favor of the United Nations General Assembly resolution condemning Russia's actions and advocates for peaceful resolution to this conflict. But at the same time, they have consistently failed to call the conflict as an invasion, nor name Russia as the aggressor in this certain conflict. And these are the following countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, Brunei, Timor-Leste. And as for the neutral stance, neutrality, these are the countries that stayed relatively muted as the conflict progressed, neither voting for or going against Russia in the United Nations General Assembly resolutions, nor condemning or calling out Russia by name, and these are Vietnam and Laos. Lastly, we have the affirmative endorsement. These are the countries that explicitly justify Russia's actions and continuously support the country's campaign towards Ukraine, and that is Myanmar. We move on to what are the proactive measures being conducted by these countries as the conflict progresses between Russia and Ukraine. So Singapore, we looked into first the support for Ukraine on the first half of this graph. Singapore has imposed sanctions and restrictions against Russia. Additionally, Singapore has extended a humanitarian assistance package to Ukraine, which includes ambulances, firefighting protective gear, rescue equipment, mine detectors, and crucial medical supplies. As for Malaysia, they have provided medical assistance to Ukraine, fostering enhanced collaboration with Ukraine, and specifically on healthcare. Thailand has offered a platform for direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, offering a peaceful resolution between these countries. Vietnam has also extended the humanitarian aid donation, and they enforce that there is the need or the immediate necessity to terminate the use of force, ensure civilian security, safeguard critical infrastructure, and lastly, uphold international humanitarian law. As for the Philippines, they have pledged a sum to facilitate essential humanitarian aid for the afflicted population, encompassing those displaced beyond Ukrainian borders, and they are welcoming Ukrainian refugees in the country. Timor-Leste has provided financial assistance, which is allocated through the United Nations World Food Program, and the government of Timor-Leste has also advocated for an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic solution to the conflict. So if we look into all of these, we could find out that their support for Ukraine is either materialized through an actual material support or simply through humanitarian aid, which is based off of their previous responses during the onset of the conflict. And for those who have not been able to explicitly support for Ukraine, they either have supported Russia directly or they have no developments from the onset of the conflict, whether they have responded negatively or positively supporting for Ukraine or either Russia. We move on to the next factor of this research paper, exploratory paper. We have to look into what is the basis of the Southeast Asia government's actions. Again, we go back to ASEAN being an international organization focused on non-interventionism. Therefore, they could not easily conclude or compel their own member nation states to provide a joint resolution to this conflict. And we look into where else do we find their basis for their actions, and that would be the United Nations Organization Charter. The UN Charter, this serves as the foundational treaty for both the United Nations and the United Nations system, legally categorized as a multilateral international agreement. The UN Charter reaffirms numerous key tenets of international law as well as encompassing customary norms. Cambodia, Timor-Leste, and Singapore have expressed their indeed strong condemnation of the Russian invasion, aligning its stance with the international law, the UN Charter, and the principles of sovereignty and independence. Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, they have advocated for diplomatic negotiations and peaceful resolutions while emphasizing the significance of international legal norms, aligning itself, then again, with the UN Charter. For Brunei, the response highlights the importance of respecting its commitment to regional stability and global peace. Thailand's approach involves nuanced diplomacy, voted to denounce the Russian invasion while expressing neutrality by not taking any further actions. Vietnam's response underscores its emphasis on dialogue, stability, and dedication to peaceful resolution, while Laos' neutral stance, abstaining from United Nations resolutions while urging peaceful resolutions. Lastly, for Myanmar, their legal justification is anchored on using sovereignty of Russia as their main claim. Myanmar's military junta has expressed explicit support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, citing Russia's need to maintain sovereignty and praising its role in global power balance. Lastly, we look into what are the interests of their government and their citizens, whether what's the most prominent claim made by their own country. So this is categorized actually into four, but we begin first with the economic interests and geopolitical considerations, and these are for Indonesian law. Indonesia's response is categorized by a careful equilibrium between its free and active foreign policy approach and robust economic ties with Russia. Lao's alignment with Russia is founded on historical connections and pragmatic economic necessities, as evinced by their joint initiatives in unexplored ordnance clearance and shared facility construction. For the domestic sentiments and historical affinities, these are mainly focused on what would be the citizens' interests, ideas, largely based off of the historical affinities they would have with either Russia, Ukraine, or the United States and China. And these are the countries of Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Indonesia. And then we move on to the next or last two categories for this interest. The focus for non-interventionism and pragmatic diplomacy. Well, as for Singapore, we know they have explicitly condemned Russia in this case, but the response is demonstrative of non-interventionism harmonized with pragmatic diplomacy, which the majority of Singaporeans advocate for a policy of non-intervention reinforced by their own government. So this is mainly focused on how would the citizens perceive the actions or would want their government to act on this certain conflict. So Vietnam's pragmatic approach here finds expression in its abstention from a UN vote on Ukraine, reflecting a calibrated pursuit of national interests and a seamless continuation of its foreign policy prerogatives. And as for Thailand, they initially inclined towards neutrality in the name of national interests, but they have subsequently transitioned to supporting the UN resolution, thereby showcasing its diplomatic pragmatism. And lastly, for the security and regional power dynamics, these countries would largely focus on how they would rely on the military or security alliance that they have with the either the global superpowers or the countries involved in this study. And with all of that, all of these factors, we had to plot or locate where do these countries align in this certain graph, which will be presented in the next slide. But before that, I would have to delve deeper into how would we identify whether these countries are on the side of the stance, sharing the stance of the United States, or sharing the stance of China. As it is showcased here in the slide, for the United States, these countries would have either imposed diverse sanctions, export controls, and trade measures. They have sanctioned Russian financial institutions and defense-related goods. They have ended Russia's trade status, raising tariffs on imports. They have offered energy aid, stabilizing markets, and mitigating nuclear risks. They have provided a significant financial aid, with the United States offering $13 billion dispersed. They have advanced human rights as their main focus, media freedom, and specifically democracy. They utilize presidential drawdown authority for military support. They have supplied military aid, including surplus defense items, for Ukraine, and they have provided as well humanitarian aid surpassing, that's for the United States as well. But for China's stance, they have offered resolute rhetorical support to Russia, driven by countering the United States and safeguarding their own national interests. They have sustained military collaboration with Russia, and they have also undertaken pragmatic economic actions, balancing support for Russia, while at the same time maintaining their own stability and interests. They have sought to a swift ceasefire without direct support for Russia, to evade sanctions of the international organizations, specifically of the United Nations, and they have prioritized European markets for economic gains while cautiously collaborating with Moscow on specific security matters. And as for this, we had to locate where the ASEAN member nation states stands on these on this conflict. We have given these categories, but they are not completely conclusive in the sense that these could either be supported, this could either be denounced, or could even be changed or influenced by further researchers, especially by experts on the field, on these fields of countries and on international relations of these countries as well. So for the US leaning, what does this imply? These are the countries that have responded to the conflict on par with that of the United States, and that's simply Singapore, who has shown an explicit support for Ukraine here, condemning Russia and naming it as the aggressor of this conflict. They have also imposed sanctions as well. And as for Timor-Leste, they have shown that they have condemned Russia, as it is proven in their history that they have grown to be a country wanting to remain independent and wanting to show that they cannot be they are not the only ones who have the priority for this independence, but everyone else's as well. And for the U.S. security umbrella, these are the countries that are seemingly confident with making their decisions and responses due to their militaries cooperating with that of the United States, and they are essentially under the security umbrella of that of the United States. And in this case, Philippines have expressed their concerns and wanting to have an immediate ceasefire between this conflict, and not necessarily naming Russia as the aggressor as well. As for Brunei, they have maintained this sort of balanced approach between maintaining the diplomatic pragmatism in this scenario. For the U.S. ideology support, these are the countries that are not necessarily showcasing an explicit support to either side of the global superpowers. However, their responses and actions appear to subscribe to that of the United States' aim to be the desired conclusion for this conflict. And as for the next part of this,
I give you 1 more minute.
Yes.
I give you 1 more minute.
All right, thank you. Last part of the presentation. Next slide. Lastly, we have the balancing approach, cautious neutrality, China support, and China leading. For the balancing approach, this affirms the importance of independence and be able to adhere to international legal norms. For cautious neutrality, they avoid the action to vote on the resolutions of the international organizations and remaining steadfast on their pursuit of their own national interests. China support, this is simply Laos abstaining from voting on the United Nations resolutions and showing doubts on sanctions capacity to reach this conclusion or this peaceful conclusion to this scenario. And as for Myanmar, their military junta already provides their space as an extended or additional base of military operations for Russia. As for the China-leaning part, this is inconclusive, but however, we have to acknowledge the historical affinities that Cambodia has with China. And lastly, for the next slide, this is simply the conclusion of our paper. This paper presented the delicate balancing actions undertaken by ASEAN member nation states towards the Russo-Ukrainian crisis alongside the US-China political economic rift on the issue, and even further beyond. Southeast Asia governments' responses to the conflict have displayed varying patterns that are reflective of the region's diversity, yet interwoven political systems, economic interests, international linkages, and historical ties. And what we are doing here is we would like to be able to collaborate with further researchers, experts as well in the fields of ASEAN as an international organization, and ASEAN member nation states. That would be all from us. Thank you so much.
Okay, let me be quick because we are all starting, right? This is seems a very good collective teamwork, organized by your professor, and the 4 of you are here. And this paper deals with ASEAN's countries' diplomatic equilibrium. I'm impressed by the valuable detailed collection of the diplomatic nuances or various acts of balance by each country. And you offer a credible explanation of how they choose to react this way. And I particularly like the author's schematic classification of 4 responses, okay? And that help us to discern the emergence of intricate geopolitical landscape in Indo-Pacific. Here I offer some questions and suggestions for you. And first, it seems that this paper is persuasive on the former part concerning Russia-Ukraine conflict, but the latter part is a bit weaker. That addresses U.S.-China's rivalry in mobilizing supports from Southeast Asia countries. Because I see two parts have some kind of repetitive paragraphs, you know. I would more interested to see more about how U.S. and China exercise influence on these countries, particularly on Russia-Ukraine war, because it seems kind of reasonable that the United States would like to mobilize diplomatic support more from the broader third world countries. So Southeast Asia countries would feel some kind of pressure, if I call it, from the United States. But I see little need for China to mobilize ASEAN countries' support to side with Russia. I would say they are less likely to do so because they themselves kind of keep a very careful stance, not siding with Russia too closely. So I think the latter part would be difficult to write. But in your presentation, you offer something, you know, about member states' relationship with U.S. and the member state relationship with China, and then try to see how their diplomatic act differ. But there's still lack of evidence that how U.S. and how China perceive Southeast Asia supports as crucial. I think on the Russia case, it's so evident. So I just see this is intricate and difficult to write. And second, how to define equilibrium. Because I would like to see if ASEAN has a collective statement on this matter, and how allowing member states to have some kind of room to maneuver, a little bit of distancing or condemnation, you know, on Russia. I would see that as an equilibrium, but it's hard to, you know. I think that part would be interesting to, if you have that, you know, how to negotiate with ASEAN as a whole, and as a member state individually. And the last point is about a recent Israel-Palestinian conflict. Now there's another war is coming. And what do you think if this incident in Middle East has a great ramification on Southeast Asian countries collectively, or member states respectively, that I would like to, maybe you could have another paper. It's the coming, and then you can see, you know, how, you know, diplomatic maneuvering and stances developing. And I think that's a good work, and I really appreciate being discussed. Okay, thank you.
I like the last comment made by Professor Lee. Your paper is inspiring in that regard. You talked about Russia invasion of Ukraine, and ASEAN has certain positions. What about the war going on right now? The ASEAN, or these member states, would have very different positions, right? And how do you compare that, given all the variables that you just talked about, diplomacy, history, economic, and so on and so forth. Here, I think, for the present war of Israel and Gaza, it has to do with religion, or it has to do with their foreign policy, which are oriented towards certain religious belief. You know, here I'm not sure if you can bring in China. I thought, you know, for Russian-Ukrainian war, here the major variable will be United States rather than China. Here I think you're bringing in China as a kind of afterthought, or maybe because your concern is about China-America rivalry, and that's why you're bringing it in. But if you don't bring that in, I think you still can make a case for yourself. And in the very beginning, you talked about the United Nations Charter. I thought that was a good cover-up, a kind of a shield for many of the ASEAN countries to tell the position, to signify to the rest of the world what their positions are. But actually, that is just a kind of excuse for doing what they did. It has more to do with whether they are aligned with America or whether they're not. You see, and China is actually more or less irrelevant to me. I'm not sure if you agree with this, but anyway, we have passed 12:10, which is the time given to us to stop this panel. But I think we still can ask some. Can we extend this to another 5 minutes? Let me hear the responses from the presenters. The first presenter, the second presenter, and the third presenter, given what Professor Lee has commented on what you just presented. Very briefly, can we have the first presenter? Do you have any response? No? Nothing to say about what I said? Okay. Go ahead.
The Asia Barometer survey is quite limited, as I said, and then
Not all of the relevant variables that you implied can be found in, for example, earlier variants or versions of the survey. However, as to my last point about China, tweaking its soft power, I think any country, Taiwan including, should project as a function of its global branding, a benign attitude, right? Regardless of whether or not we're projecting to a particular community or identity. So I'm leaving that as a comment, as a default. It's a principle, a basic one of that, with respect to global branding. So regardless whether your audience belongs to a particular identity or not, any country, I think, should project, a benign kind of soft power. I really agree about China's stance. Probably if we plot China's approach over the years, we can see a different trend. Earlier, probably pre-1970s, it would be like, a charming China. And then over the years, especially after the arbitrary ruling involving the Philippines and states' realization that we cannot, my country cannot implement that arbitrary ruling, China has become more aggressive actually. It's as if posturing, right? Sending a signal, at this point, it's futile to actually sue us or bring us to an international court, especially if you're the like of someone who cannot implement.
Yeah, on that point, I have a question for you. I think Professor Lee brought up this idea of regional identity versus multilateralism. To me, based on your presentation, you are actually talking about the citizens' perception of whether they believe they identify themselves as ASEANists or as the individual countries like Filipino or Singaporean or Malaysian, and that in the end will affect foreign policy.
Yes.
But to me, I think the gap is very, very big. Foreign policy making is an elite activities, not a reflection of citizens' preferences. You see, so how do you? That's my question for you. How do you then jump to that level, saying that public opinions of China actually will affect foreign policy, and ultimately it will affect alliances within the member countries in ASEAN.
Actually, there's a theory, the domestic politics line of thought, that argues that statesmen, or the elites in this case, merely reflect the preferences of their citizens. So I suppose even in Taiwan, leaders are not really that naive about people's sentiments. So there are ways by which you can gauge people's opinion. Public opinion exists everywhere, and basically, you just sense what, try to sense what people feel about a particular country. And based on those, shall we say, predispositions, they try to formulate a foreign policy approach towards a particular state. As I've shown earlier, the Philippines Filipino citizens are quite rather interesting lot because we have a lukewarm approach towards China. At the level of the citizens, it seems to me that we don't quite hate China, so we're in the middle. Although the previous administration, with respect to China, and we're talking about high-level foreign policy, seems to be chummy with China, friendly. At the level of the citizens, however, it's kind of different.
Okay. Can we have the comments from the last presenter?
Okay, good morning. So I would like to address first the question about how to negotiate, how could ASEAN could negotiate as a whole. Unfortunately, according to our readings and based on our perspective, ASEAN could simply cannot give a collective response in terms of conflicts, international conflicts specifically. Because if we can clearly remember, ASEAN was formed not as a geopolitical organization to serve as a framework for resolving international conflicts. Rather, it was formed as to promote economic and social integration in the Southeast Asian region. And if ASEAN would, in fact, enter into this resolutions internationally as a whole, as an organization, it would, for us, it would defeat its purpose. Because again, its purpose is mainly economic and social-cultural. And therefore, our research looked at the individual responses of each member nation states, because at the very beginning, we already know that ASEAN have no strong stance with regards to this. But though, we should remember that ASEAN released a statement collectively, but again, that statement was weak compared to what is expected, for example, as a response compared to the European Union and other organizations internationally. And my colleague will answer another question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also would like to express my thoughts on whether China is irrelevant on this discussion. We actually have tried to rethink whether China plays a vital role in the discussion on this matter. But as we have discovered during the onset of the conflict, when the barrage of sanctions was pouring down on Russia, China had built ironclad relationship with Russia, significantly saving Russia during that time, because Russia was, as I would describe it, really was down during that time. No allies, no economic partners, basically during the onset of the conflict. But China partnering most particularly on economic integration with Russia, as they described it, ironclad relationship. Basically, China kind of saved Russia during that time, and that for us is a great factor to determine whether China is relevant or irrelevant on this discussion. That will be all. Thank you very much. My colleague would like to add whether the Israeli-Palestine war would play a significant discussion on this as well.
Okay, so for the recent Israel-Palestinian conflict, well, it wasn't recent, it was prolonged throughout history. Since the early 20th century, it was already been in conflict. So now Israeli Jews, history settled at the former Palestinian land after the First World War and continued to expand throughout the years. Now the main, probably the main driving force in this conflict of the Palestinian and the, Israel conflict would be religion. As we all know, Jews and Muslims, as well as of course Christians, have recorded bloody conflicts throughout the years in the past, hundreds of years. Of course, the Crusades. Here, as of now, we lack the necessary data. However, I was able to read articles where stating the sentiments of the Israeli people seems to be saying that their religion is better. In the like sentiments, however, that's just one of the articles I have seen. There is still inconclusive data which I can provide. So for the Palestinian, they are stating that they are protecting themselves, protecting their whatever lands left for them. So yeah, one of the factor would be yes, the religion and their sovereignty as well. So it will be all.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think that is a very elaborate response from the Filipino teams. By the way, they are undergraduate students, so I must compliment your performance. You all did very well. Okay, now I think we had a good discussion in this panel. Right, from the very beginning, we talked about the maritime issue, and then we talked about multilateralism, and then talk about China. U.S. rivalry in the context of Ukrainian war, and then we talk about the present war, right, in the Middle East. So all these, I think, international concepts, international events actually are linked in many ways. And for us who are studying international relations, would certainly agree that we cannot ignore, right, any of these events in an isolated way. They are all connected. In fact, when I was listening to the first presenter and the second presenter, I already am drawing, connections, right, between these various issues. Although I think different presenters approach the topic in a different way, or using different framework or theories, But ultimately, our concern is really about, war and peace. Okay. So with that, I must thank all the presenters, and I must thank Professor Lee for very insightful comments. And I'm sure the presenters will have a lot to take in from her very thoughtful comments on your presentations. Okay, we will end here. Thank you very much. If you don't mind, can we have the presenters and the commentator coming up here, take a group photograph for posterity. Okay. And the rest of you, I think, and the rest of us, right, will go for lunch and follow instructions from our volunteers and see where you go. Okay, thank you.
nice to know. Oh, you're also a guy, but different. Oh. Okay. Did you guys collect reports?
Yeah, I'm an exchange student. Yeah. Yeah.
Is it the assignment?